It is an unhappy truth universally acknowledged that a man enjoying his second glass of Tokay beneath the clipped yew hedges of an early autumn garden must shortly be summoned to witness something unutterably disagreeable. Lord Peter Wimsey, lounging in the indolent shadows of the Norfolk estate of Sir Julian Fremantle, where the dahlias bloomed with smug brutality and the conversation had stalled somewhere between trollop and trout fishing, received such a summons on the 3rd Tuesday of September at precisely 4:15 in the afternoon. The footman, pale about the gills and unaccustomed to disturbing nobility mid-sipping, cleared his throat with the solemnity of a minor prophet. "Begging pardon, my lord, but Lady Fremantle requests you at once. There's been—" Here the man hesitated, as if the word might combust on his tongue. "An occurrence in the horological room." Wimsey lifted an eyebrow with the mild surprise of a man asked to adjudicate an argument between clocks. "An occurrence? What sort of occurrence?" One of the chimes refused to obey Greenwich and leapt recklessly into continental time. "I believe," said the footman, and his voice cracked like a poorly aged sherry. "It's Mr. Ambrose Locksley, sir. He's been found, quite dead." Wimsey did not leap to his feet. He stood with the weary elegance of a man who had once solved 3 murders between the cheese course and a game of baccarat. He adjusted his tie, an excruciating affair of rust and mustard that had already been likened to an ill-tempered sunset, and followed the servant through the long glass corridor leading to the east wing of Wake's Hollow, Sir Julian's sprawling Georgian manor. The house had the air of having been built to impress foreign dignitaries who never arrived, and subsequently redecorated by a woman with a taste for peacock blue upholstery and fainting couches. The horological room, so called for its excessive population of clocks, from pendulum to cuckoo to an ornate Turkish sundial whose numerals ran counter to the ambitions of most men, was kept locked unless Sir Julian or his cousin Mr. Locksley was in residence. Lord Peter entered it now with the mild distaste of one entering an over-decorated chapel devoted to a deity of punctuality. The smell struck him first. Not blood, that would have been too vulgar, but something subtler. The cold, faintly metallic tang of oil and brass, like an old railway station whose engines had all gone to ruin. Mr. Ambrose Locksley was sitting upright in the Queen Anne armchair beneath the brass skeleton clock. His head was canted oddly, as though he were listening for a sound that never came. His eyes, fixed glassily at the barometer, reflected no fear, no violence, only a terminal irritation. "He looks," murmured Wimsey, "as if someone had just told him the hour, and he'd decided he didn't care to go on." Lady Fremantle stood nearby, trembling with the delicate precision of a soufflé on a trembling tray. I don't understand it. He was perfectly well at luncheon. Argumentative, of course, but that was typical Ambrose. And then he said he needed to wind the French clock, the one from Lyons, and I left him here, only to find him, like that. Said Wimsey, kneeling beside the corpse with gentle familiarity. "No signs of struggle, no overturned furnishings, not even a spilled drop of port. How dreadfully well behaved, and yet Ambrose never behaved well unless he had an audience." Dr. Manvers, the local physician, bustled in at that moment with the red-cheeked seriousness of a man who once removed an ingrown toenail from the Bishop of Ely and now believed himself a medical authority. He blinked at Wimsey, sniffed the air, and pronounced no obvious cause, but I dare say his heart simply gave out. Said Wimsey again, rising slowly and glancing at the walls. 29 clocks. Not one ticking. The silence rang with something more than absence, a peculiar intent, as though the room were holding its breath. Wimsey's gaze landed on the French clock, a gilt monstrosity atop the mahogany mantelpiece, adorned with nymphs and horses, who looked, to his mind, distinctly embarrassed by their own ornamentation. "This," said Wimsey gently, pointing with his cane, "was the one he meant to wind." Lady Fremantle nodded, clutching a lace handkerchief that might once have been fashionable in Florence circa 1883. "Curious," said Whimsy, "because it's fully wound, and yet, unless my eyes deceive me, it is not ticking." He leaned forward, placed his ear to the ornate contraption, and frowned. Not jammed, not broken, simply silent. A clock struck dumb. One wonders what it heard. He straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his knees. "Tell me, Lady Fremantle, when precisely did you last hear any of these clocks?" She blinked. Why this morning, of course. They chimed quite normally at 11. "Indeed," murmured Whimsy, eyes narrowing slightly. "Then I suspect poor Mr. Locksley died sometime between 11 and now, and with his passing, the clocks ceased to tick." Lady Fremantle gasped. "You don't think it was a curse?" Whimsy smiled with the slow indulgence of a man who had once disproved a ghost by means of a misplaced butter dish. "No, madam, not a curse, but perhaps a—" Silence imposed. Clocks, after all, are dreadfully gossipy things, and it seems to me someone wanted very much to shut them up. And with that, he turned, cane tapping, toward the door. "Fetch Bunter," he called over his shoulder, "and tell him to bring my gloves, my notebook, and the little silver whistle from the sedan's side compartment. We are going to interview the help, and do find me a cup of something bracing. All these dead clocks have given me the most beastly sensation of being early for something dreadful." The drawing-room, too, which the household had now withdrawn, offered a kind of stage for the gentle disintegration of civility. Chairs were drawn too close to one another. Tea-things rattled faintly on a rosewood tray. A maid lingered at the threshold, caught between duty and dread. The clock on the mantel ticked audibly. This one had not been in the horological room, and seemed to Lord Peter Whimsy like an over-enthusiastic understudy trying to impress in the absence of the true cast. "Really, my lord," murmured Lady Fremantle, pressing a teaspoon into his hand with something bordering on accusation. Ambrose was not the sort of man to simply die. Not here, not during a perfectly ordinary afternoon. He detested the ordinary. Whimsy accepted the tea with a murmur of thanks and an absent swirl. "Quite. An inconvenient man, I gather, but not an uninteresting one. And yet here we are, thrust headlong into what is either a very polite murder or a theatrically timed demise." Sir Julian, seated near the fireplace with the ruffled dignity of a portrait brought to life, said nothing. His mouth worked beneath his mustache, and his fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on his knee, not in time with the ticking clock. Whimsy noted this incongruity with interest and turned to the maid. "You are?" he asked, in tones not unlike an indulgent uncle asking after a child's imaginary friend. "Elsie, sir," she replied, her voice thin. "Upstairs maid. Been here 4 years come Christmas." 4 years. Good heavens, I hope they're feeding you something better than memories. "Tell me, Elsie, what did you see today?" She twisted her apron, then spoke quickly. "I brought the tea tray to the horological room as usual, at just gone 4. That's when I saw him. Mr. Locksley. He looked asleep, sir. I thought he was asleep. Only his eyes were open, and he had this look like he'd heard something dreadful." "You didn't hear anything yourself? A cry? A noise? Perhaps a silence too profound?" She blinked. "Beg pardon, sir. No, never mind. Let me rephrase in the vulgar. Did you hear anything odd?" She shook her head. "Only the French clock, sir. That one always chimes just before 4. Just once, but today it didn't." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Very good, Elsie. Clocks that stop when a man dies. That's all very Wagnerian, isn't it? Except our Ambrose did not die at 4 o'clock. No, I fancy he died earlier. That is the problem, you see. Or rather, the solution masquerading as a problem." Elsie looked about to curtsy, but thought better of it. Whimsy turned to Bunter, who had materialized without fuss, and now stood bearing gloves, notebook, and the requested silver whistle. He was dressed with such crisp sobriety that one might think he'd emerged from a cupboard in full livery by magic. "If you please, Bunter, would you examine the clocks in the horological room? I want to know 3 things. Which are wound, which are not, and whether any show signs of having been tampered with. I should particularly like to know whether that absurd contraption with the nymphs has been silenced or merely allowed to run down." "Yes, my lord," said Bunter, vanishing once more with priestly calm. Lady Fremantle stirred her tea with an unnecessary flourish. "Ambrose did have enemies," she said suddenly. "He was always writing those ghastly letters to the Times, about railways and socialism and organ grinders. Always something. He loved stirring things up. Once he wrote an entire article suggesting the Royal Mail should be privatized and replaced with trained dogs. Said it was more efficient." "Remarkably prescient," murmured Whimsy. "Still, one assumes most readers confined their outrage to ink and brandy. You don't suspect someone read one of his letters and decided to come call with a dagger?" "There was someone," Sir Julian said quietly. "A man in the village, young fellow, bit wild-eyed. Name's Derry, Reuben Derry. Father owns the petrol station. Ambrose accused him of theft last year. Quite the scandal. Claimed Reuben stole one of his father's watches when he came to deliver paraffin. Nonsense, of course, but the boy never got over it." Whimsy raised a brow. "A feud over timepieces. How delicately ironic. And where might I find young Reuben?" Lady Fremantle sniffed. "He loiters about the green, hates the gentry, reads poetry, that sort." Whimsy smiled. "Excellent. A romantic suspect. Perhaps he'll write us a sonnet confessing to murder." At that moment, Bunter re-entered, silent as smoke. "My lord, I've examined the clocks. Of the 29, 25 were fully wound, including the French one. All but 3 have stopped." "Curious," murmured Whimsy, standing. "A death among the tickings. Yet the clocks stand still. Time, one might say, took a breath." Lady Fremantle looked pale again. Do you think the clocks were silenced? That someone?" "I think," said Whimsy, "that if you had just killed a man in a room full of clocks, you might want to be very sure none of them kept time too precisely. It would be most inconvenient, after all, if one of them betrayed the truth." He excused himself and walked with Bunter back to the horological room. The air was no less stale, though now touched by a faint tang of oil and disturbed fabric. He paced the room in silence. The French clock, he now inspected it closely, bore a fine web of dust across its rear casing, and yet the mechanism inside was gleaming. "Bunter," he murmured, "what do you observe?" "The brass casing was recently wiped, my lord. Likely this morning, but not the underside. Suggests someone cleaned it hastily, perhaps to cover prints or residue." "Quite so. And if someone cleaned the clock, might they also have interfered with the mechanism?" "It's possible. The chime hammer appears, misaligned. It would silence the chime without altering the hands." "And the rest of the clocks?" "A mix of spring and pendulum models. The 4 that still tick are electric." Electric clocks would continue without winding. The rest stopped, as you say. But how? Unless..." He walked to a low pendulum clock and tested the swing. It moved freely, but no tick followed. Sabotage. Not mechanical failure. A thin sliver of felt in the works, perhaps. Something temporary. It would only need to stop for an hour, just long enough to obscure the moment of death. "Then the killer knew their clocks," said Bunter, "and knew Mr. Locksley's habits," said Whimsy, "including that he would retreat to this room after lunch." But what did they not know? Ah, yes, who else might notice the clocks had stopped? Because to kill a man in a room of clocks and tamper with the clocks to hide it is a wonderfully elegant gesture. Unless, of course, one of those clocks had not been tampered with. Whimsy turned on his heel. "Come, Bunter, let us walk the gardens. If I know my murderers, and I dare say I do, then someone has made a mistake, and it is ticking away even now." The afternoon sunlight lay like a golden blanket over the gardens, yet the brightness could not dispel the unease that clung to Lord Peter Wimsey as he and Bunter paced slowly along the clipped box hedges and gravelled paths. The well-manicured grounds of Elmstead Manor were, like the house itself, a polished veneer masking a certain brittleness, an air of genteel tension beneath the forced civility. "Tell me, Bunter," Wimsey began, his tone as casual as if they were discussing the merits of various cigars rather than a recent murder. "Did you notice anything peculiar about the household's daily rhythm? Any irregularities in servant movements or unusual visitors to the house?" Bunter, ever the observant valet, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, my lord, the usual staff are accounted for, but Miss Elsie mentioned a gentleman in the village who has been seen lurking near the manor recently. One Reuben Derry, the petrol station owner's son, apparently with a temper as combustible as his family's stock." Wimsey nodded. "Ah, yes, the young poet and would-be revolutionary. He is the red herring par excellence, though no doubt he is quite sincere in his loathing of Mr. Locksley. Still, passion is not proof." They turned a corner where a stone bench overlooked a small pond, the water's surface rippling gently with a breeze. Wimsey paused, watching a dragonfly flit erratically, and mused aloud. "One often finds that the key to such a puzzle is not in what is present, but what is absent, what has been cleverly removed or carefully concealed." Bunter glanced at him with mild amusement. "Are you referring to the missing salver, my lord? The one Lady Fremantle mentioned was absent from the sideboard in the drawing-room." "Precisely. Small detail easily dismissed, but in a house as regimented as this, such a thing cries out to be noticed. It was there yesterday, she says, and now it is gone, and yet none among the household admits to knowing its fate." They continued their circuit of the garden, Wimsey's eyes catching on the peculiar arrangement of shadows cast by the wrought-iron gazebo. "I am particularly intrigued by the soundproofing, or supposed soundproofing, of the horological room. Lady Fremantle assures us it is intended to block the tick-tock cacophony, but I find the notion more theatrical than practical." Bunter raised an eyebrow. "The room is panelled with thick oak, my lord, and has heavy curtains, but I should imagine some sound does escape." "Exactly. If our murderer wished to mask the fatal moment, would they rely on soundproofing alone? Or might there be an accomplice or an alibi, dependent on timing?" As if in answer, a sudden clatter from the house caused both men to glance toward the windows. A maid, flustered and breathless, appeared in the garden doorway. "My lord, Miss Elsie has discovered something. Something in the study. She insists I bring you immediately." Wimsey inclined his head. "Lead the way, Bunter." They returned indoors, ascending the grand staircase with deliberate calm. The study was a room dominated by rows of heavy tomes, leather-bound and formidable. Elsie stood near the desk, pointing to the scattered papers upon it. "Look here, my lord," she said. "I found this half hidden behind the globe. It's a letter, but it's torn, almost as if someone wanted it destroyed." Wimsey took the fragment gingerly, inspecting the fine, cramped handwriting. "Cannot continue as before. The past shadows every step. If I do not act, all is lost." Intriguing, is it not? And signed with the initials A.L. Bunter glanced over the fragment. Could this be Ambrose's handwriting? Possibly, but note the urgency. Cannot continue as before. What was he trying to hide or escape from? A tangled web, indeed. Lady Fremantle, who had followed quietly, seemed to bristle at the suggestion. Ambrose was a man of principle, but perhaps he carried old regrets like all of us. He was not perfect, Lord Peter. Few of us are, Lady Fremantle, but some of us are better at hiding our imperfections. Wimsey's gaze swept the room, settling briefly on a peculiar clock perched above the fireplace. A curious piece with a painted face and no hands. Odd, is it not? A clock without hands. A symbol, perhaps, or merely a joke. Ambrose had a strange sense of humor, Lady Fremantle admitted. He delighted in the macabre. Macabre, yes, but I suspect this clock is more than a mere decoration. Perhaps a silent witness to his final hours. Whimsy's mind worked swiftly, piecing together the fragments of time, motive, and opportunity. The letter, the clocks, the missing salver, all threads in a tapestry woven with care and deception. "Bunter," he said quietly, "I want you to review the household schedules in detail. Every comings and goings recorded, every errand noted. We must establish who was where and when with absolute precision." "As you wish, my lord." Whimsy turned to Lady Fremantle. "You mentioned a visitor this afternoon, a Mr. Derry, yes? Did anyone see him enter the house or speak with Ambrose?" She hesitated. "No, but I did hear raised voices earlier. Faint, but unmistakable. It sounded like a quarrel, but I thought it was between Ambrose and Sir Julian." "Very well. Quarrels are a hallmark of estates, but we must know the truth." As the afternoon waned, the investigation settled into a rhythm as meticulous and precise as the clocks themselves. Whimsy moved with quiet purpose, his mind ever alert to the contradictions and subtleties others overlooked. The manor's secrets were revealing themselves slowly, like the turning of clock hands, inescapable, inexorable. The next step, he knew, was to confront the villagers, to trace the elusive Reuben Derry, and to uncover what lay beneath the polished surfaces of Elmstead Manor. For in the interplay of time and deception, the true nature of Ambrose Locksley's death awaited discovery, cloaked in shadows yet to be fully understood. The village of Elmstead, with its snug cottages and tidy gardens, seemed an unlikely place for scandal or violence. Yet beneath its quaint exterior bubbled the discontents of its inhabitants as surely as the modest stream that trickled through its outskirts. Lord Peter Whimsy and Bunter took to the cobbled main street with the purposeful air of men who knew the stakes were rising. Their first call was the petrol station, a modest establishment run by Mr. Derry Sr., a grizzled man with permanent furrows etched deep from years of hard work and hard temper. Inside, behind the counter cluttered with newspapers and confectionery, stood Reuben Derry, his youth betrayed only by the fervor in his eyes, which burned like a candle threatening to gutter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Derry," Whimsy began with a smile that was more analytical than friendly. "I trust you are well." Reuben's gaze flicked up sharply. "Who's asking?" "A curious friend of the late Mr. Locksley's. I hear you've had some disagreements of late." The young man's jaw tightened. "I'll not deny it. Ambrose was a man who enjoyed making enemies." "Indeed. Would you say any of those disagreements were serious enough to wish him harm?" "Not I," Reuben said with a snort. "If anyone had cause, it was Sir Julian. The old man's temperament is well known." Whimsy noted the deflection but did not press immediately. Instead, he leaned in slightly. "Might you tell me where you were at the hour Ambrose died?" Reuben's eyes narrowed. "At the Green Man pub, nursing a pint and my own thoughts." "Ask anyone there." The innkeeper, a stout woman with sharp eyes, confirmed the alibi with a brusque nod. "Reuben was here till well past 7. Plenty of witnesses." "Very well. And did you see or hear anything unusual around the manor that day?" Reuben shook his head. "No, but that doesn't mean nothing happened. People hide things, my lord." "Indeed. People hide things very well," Whimsy murmured, almost to himself. Leaving the station, Whimsy allowed his mind to sift through the fragments gathered thus far. Reuben was genuine, or at least convincing, and the villagers' reluctance to volunteer information suggested more than mere politeness. As they made their way to the village churchyard, Whimsy's attention caught on the neat rows of headstones, some worn, some freshly engraved. Among them stood Reverend Clement Marsh, a man whose mild manner belied a sharp intellect and a penchant for local gossip. "Reverend Marsh," Whimsy said with an incline of his head, "I trust the loss of Mr. Locksley has been a blow to your congregation." The clergyman sighed, clasping his hands. A great blow, Lord Peter. He was a man of some mystery, much beloved yet also feared. Feared? Yes. You see, he was involved in matters beyond the parish's concern, politics, land disputes, and occult interests, if rumors are to be believed. Wimsey's eyes twinkled with mild amusement. The occult, you say? Now that would be a delightful complication. Delightful, perhaps, Reverend Marsh replied, but likely just idle talk. Still, it fed the unease. Some villagers whisper of strange noises at night near the manor, the ticking of clocks out of sync, shadows where none should fall. Curious. And the clocks themselves? I understand the manor boasts a fine collection. A remarkable assortment, Ambrose's passion. But one clock, the one in the horological room, has been silent since the incident. No hands, no tick, as if time itself had stopped there. Fascinating. Wimsey paused. Might I inspect this horological room? The Reverend nodded. Of course. I believe Lady Fremantle has been most accommodating. Back at the manor, Wimsey and Bunter were led to the horological room, a space cloaked in dark panelling, heavy drapes drawn partly aside to reveal a vast array of timepieces. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old machinery. Wimsey moved among the clocks, noting the varied mechanisms, pendulums swinging with hypnotic regularity. His fingers traced the edges of a particularly ornate clock, one that was conspicuously devoid of hands. A clock without hands, Wimsey murmured. A metaphor, surely, or a deliberate act. But why would a man so obsessed with time keep such a thing? Bunter examined the heavy curtains and the thick door, tapping lightly. Not quite soundproof, my lord, but close. Soundproofing is rarely absolute, Bunter, and this clock's silence is no accident. I suspect it marks the moment something stopped irrevocably. Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Fremantle, who carried herself with the poise of one accustomed to managing difficult situations with a calm exterior. My lord, she said quietly, I confess there is something I have withheld. Ambrose was not entirely as you have been told. He had secrets, and not all were welcome. Wimsey inclined his head. Secrets, Lady Fremantle, are the currency of mystery. Do you care to share? She hesitated, then nodded. Ambrose had begun to suspect someone close to him, someone in the house, was betraying his trust. He mentioned strange noises, misplaced items, even spoke of feeling watched. Feeling watched? Wimsey's eyes gleamed. An old, familiar theme. Indeed. He confided to me his fear that his timepieces were being tampered with, that someone wished to unsettle him, to drive him mad. Ah, psychological warfare. Fear, paranoia, suspicion, all powerful weapons. And he was not a man to suffer fools lightly. He had planned to confront this betrayer, but the opportunity was lost. Wimsey considered this. A confrontation planned but never realized. Timing, as always, is everything. Lady Fremantle's voice was low. There is one other matter, the missing salver. It was a silver tray, ornate and valuable, but more so for the inscription it bore, a family motto lost with it. Curious, a personal token then. Often such items carry more weight than mere silver. Wimsey's mind raced through the implications. The salver's disappearance, the tampered clocks, the hidden letter fragment, each a piece of a larger puzzle. Tell me, Lady Fremantle, did Ambrose have enemies beyond the household? Business rivals, perhaps? She shook her head. Not openly. But there were debts, disputes over land, and a nephew, Sir Julian, who was restless and bitter. Sir Julian, Wimsey repeated. A man whose temper you mentioned earlier. Sharp and quick, he had a reputation for reckless behavior and resentment of his uncle's strict control. As always, family is a minefield. Wimsey turned to Bunter. I want every scrap of information on Sir Julian's whereabouts this past week, and have the household's routines been fully documented?" Bunter inclined his head. "Already underway, my lord. The staff's statements are being cross-referenced for inconsistencies." Wimsey allowed himself a brief smile. "Excellent. It is in the minutiae that the truth hides." As dusk settled over Elmstead, the manor's grand windows caught the fading light, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward hidden corners. Lord Peter Wimsey stood alone in the horological room once more, eyes fixed on the silent clock. Time had stopped here, yes, but the story was far from over. The next morning dawned cold and overcast, the kind of weather that seemed to seep into one's bones and cast a subtle pall over even the most cheerful dispositions. Lord Peter Wimsey, accompanied by Bunter, resumed his meticulous inquiry, beginning with a re-examination of the household staff's statements and the surrounding events of the fateful evening. Wimsey found himself drawn back to the garden terrace where Ambrose Locksley's body had been discovered. The morning light revealed new subtleties in the scene, the faintest impressions in the soft earth, the precise angle at which a fallen leaf had settled, the slight irregularity of footprints leading away from the spot. Nothing overtly startling, but these were the sorts of details that might yield insight when seen in proper context. Bunter was already engaged with Miss Tilly, the housemaid who had first found the body. She was a timid creature, her voice barely above a whisper, and she wrung her hands nervously as Wimsey approached. "Miss Tilly," Wimsey began, "I understand this has been a distressing time for you." She nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, my lord. I keep thinking I might have seen something or heard something unusual that night." "Do tell," Wimsey encouraged, his tone gentle but intent. "Well, I was tidying the drawing-room at around 6:30 when I thought I heard the clock strike the hour," she faltered. "But when I looked at the grandfather clock, it had not moved. It was as though the sound came from elsewhere." Wimsey's brow arched slightly. "Did you hear the clock strike elsewhere? Perhaps one of the smaller clocks in the hall?" "I'm not sure. There was a faint echo, but it was odd, like the sound was delayed or muffled." "Curious. And were you alone at the time?" "Yes, my lord." "Thank you, Miss Tilly. That will be all for now." As the housemaid scurried away, Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter. The auditory discrepancy is an important thread. It suggests a manipulation of sound, or perhaps an attempt to disguise the time of events. Bunter nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps the striking clock was used to mask the timing of the murder. Precisely. The very absence of sound from the horological room's clock becomes a signal rather than a silence. Their next visit was to the kitchens, where Mrs. Groves, the cook, presided with an iron fist and a wary eye. Her testimony was less dramatic, but no less telling. "Did you notice anything unusual in the household routines on the evening of the murder?" Wimsey inquired. Mrs. Groves wiped her hands on her apron. "The servants' supper was late, sir. Usually we eat at 6, but that night it was pushed back by nearly an hour. There was talk of a meeting in the library." "Ah, a meeting. Who attended?" "Lady Freemantle, Sir Julian, and Mr. Locksley himself. Some of the servants thought it was a family council." Wimsey's interest deepened. "And the servants, were they given any instructions unusual for the evening?" Mrs. Groves shook her head. "Only that all lights be kept low and the house quiet. A deliberate effort to avoid disturbance. It fits with the notion of something clandestine." "Indeed." Returning to the manor's vast library, Wimsey requested to see the room's layout, focusing particularly on the doors and windows. It was a space lined with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling, illuminated by tall, leaded windows that looked out over the gardens. The room was long and narrow, with a heavy oak desk near the far end. Wimsey tested the locks on the windows and doors, noting the mechanism's resistance and the thickness of the leaded glass. "The library offers few opportunities for ingress or egress without detection," he observed aloud. Bunter ran his finger along the floorboards, looking for any irregularities. "There is a faint gap near the fireplace, my lord, as if a panel has been disturbed." "Excellent eye, Bunter. This panel could provide a secret entrance or concealment." Whimsy pried gently and discovered a narrow cupboard space behind it, empty save for dust and cobwebs. A forgotten hiding place, perhaps, or a place where something was removed. His mind returned to the missing salver, an ornate silver tray with a family motto engraved upon it. A symbol, yes, but possibly a key to something more. "Bunter, ensure the entire house is searched again for any similar panels or hidden compartments. This house's secrets may well be carved into its walls." As afternoon slipped into evening, Whimsy's thoughts returned once more to the enigmatic figure of Sir Julian Locksley. The nephew's known temperament, combined with his recent disputes, made him a person of interest, but Whimsy was cautious. "We must not be seduced by the obvious," he murmured. They arranged to visit Sir Julian at his nearby cottage, a modest dwelling with the unpretentious air of a man who preferred to live apart from the ancestral wealth that caused him so much ire. Sir Julian greeted them with a guarded expression, his dark eyes flickering with resentment. "I suppose I am expected to offer myself up as the villain," he said bitterly. "On the contrary, Sir Julian," Whimsy replied smoothly. "I seek only the truth, and nothing so blunt as villainy." The man laughed harshly. "Truth! In this family, truth is a weapon wielded for advantage. I have my faults, but murder is not among them." "Where were you on the evening of the 20th? "At the village inn, the Red Lion. Ask the landlord. He saw me." Whimsy's subtle smile deepened. "We shall verify your alibi, naturally. But tell me, did you know of your uncle's concern over betrayal and tampering?" Sir Julian's expression flickered. "I heard whispers, yes, but it was dismissed as paranoia. Ambrose had enemies aplenty. Perhaps one took advantage." "And you? Did you benefit from your uncle's death?" Sir Julian's eyes darkened. "I am no fool. The estate will pass to Lady Fremantle in the absence of direct heirs. I gain nothing but the burden of disgrace." Whimsy noted the bitterness, but also the precision of the statement. No hint of desperation or greed. "Very well, Sir Julian. We shall be in touch." Leaving the cottage, Whimsy pondered the constellation of motives and opportunities. The missing salver, the secret meeting, the silenced clock, the gap behind the library panel, all these threads wove a tapestry of intrigue that resisted simple explanation. That night, as the manor lay enveloped in darkness save for the flicker of candlelight, Whimsy sat alone in the horological room once more, considering the distorted time and warped sounds. There was a pattern here, he was certain. An intricate ruse that had confused the very measurement of the hour to conceal a human act. Time, after all, was a cruel master, and those who sought to manipulate it were playing a dangerous game. And somewhere in Elmstead, the guilty party waited, believing their deception secure, unaware that the clock, silent though it might be, was still ticking inexorably toward revelation. The days that followed were spent in a quiet flurry of meticulous observation and discreet inquiry. Lord Peter Whimsy's mind, as ever, was a fine-tuned instrument, perceiving the almost imperceptible shifts in atmosphere and motive beneath the veneer of polite conversation. He and Bunter devoted themselves to tracing the delicate web of relationships and half-spoken truths that clung to the old manor as stubbornly as the ivy upon its walls. One morning, while reviewing the household schedule and statements, Whimsy's attention was caught by an entry in the ledger of deliveries to Elmstead Manor. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail, a parcel addressed to Lady Fremantle, received late on the afternoon of the murder, carried by a courier from London. The parcel was described only as confidential, with no further annotation. "Bunter," Whimsy remarked as they sat in the drawing-room sipping their morning tea. "The devil is always in the details, and the confidential parcel is a summons to attention. Lady Fremantle, you see, is a woman with many layers, much like the very rooms of this house." Bunter nodded. "Shall we inquire about the contents?" "Precisely. But discretion is essential. There is an art to unearthing secrets without alarming the bearer of them." Wimsey's next interview was with Lady Fremantle herself, a striking woman whose grace concealed a formidable will. She received them in her private sitting room, where lace curtains filtered the morning sun into a soft, golden haze. There was a faint scent of violet and aged parchment, suggestive of both refinement and hidden depths. "Lord Peter, Mr. Bunter," she greeted with a polite but guarded smile. "I trust your investigations are proceeding well." "Indeed, Lady Fremantle. I'm intrigued by the parcel delivered on the day of your late husband's demise. Might you enlighten us as to its nature?" Lady Fremantle's eyes flickered ever so slightly, an almost imperceptible narrowing that did not escape Wimsey's notice. "It was a letter from my solicitor, informing me of new developments regarding the estate." "New developments?" Wimsey prompted gently. "Yes. Apparently there was a codicil to Sir Ambrose's will discovered only recently. It mentioned a beneficiary unknown to most, a distant relative residing abroad. A fascinating twist. And might this relative have any connection to the events of that evening?" "None that I am aware of," she replied smoothly, though the faintest tremor betrayed an unease beneath her polished exterior. Wimsey made a note to pursue this line further. "May I see the letter, Lady Fremantle?" She hesitated for a moment before producing a sealed envelope, which Wimsey examined discreetly. The writing was precise and legalistic, carefully worded to avoid scandal, but the substance was clear. A hidden heir named Evelyn Carstairs, a niece previously unacknowledged. Evelyn Carstairs, Wimsey mused aloud, a new player in this domestic drama, and one whose presence may well alter the balance of motive and opportunity. That afternoon, Bunter undertook a discreet search in the Manor's private archives and correspondence, unearthing a cache of letters from the late Sir Ambrose to a certain Evelyn, filled with veiled references to family discord, warnings, and a plea for secrecy. One letter, in particular, was arresting. Dated 6 months prior, it spoke of a peril that lurks within the very walls I've called home, and a desperate hope that Evelyn would be protected from the shadows cast by those closest. Wimsey read the letter with a growing sense of urgency. It would appear that Sir Ambrose was aware of a threat, one he felt compelled to shield from public knowledge. But from whom? As evening descended, Wimsey and Bunter arranged for a visit to the nearby village where Evelyn Carstairs was said to reside. They were met with cautious curiosity by the villagers, most of whom were only dimly aware of her existence. Evelyn herself was a reserved woman in her early 30s, living in a modest cottage surrounded by untended gardens and the lingering scent of wet earth. She received Wimsey with a composed demeanor that concealed a sharp intellect. "I'd heard rumors of my uncle's demise, but little else," she explained. "I was unaware of the will's alteration until my solicitor contacted me." "Your uncle mentioned a peril within Elmstead Manor," Wimsey remarked. "Might you shed light on this?" Evelyn hesitated before replying. "There have always been whispers, stories of strange noises, unexplained disappearances of heirlooms, and a sense of being watched. Some say the house itself is haunted, but I believe it is far more human and far more sinister." "Indeed," Wimsey murmured. "The supernatural is often a cloak for the more earthly and often more sordid realities." Evelyn confided that she had considered visiting earlier, but was dissuaded by Lady Fremantle, whose attentions she found obfuscating rather than enlightening. Back at the manor, Wimsey noted the atmosphere had shifted. The arrival of Evelyn Carstairs introduced new variables and unsettled the carefully maintained facades. The household buzzed quietly with speculation, but Wimsey remained detached, his mind turning over the implications. If Lady Fremantle had been intent on concealing Evelyn's existence, what did she fear? And if Sir Ambrose had been aware of danger, had he identified his adversary correctly? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Inspector Rother, the local constable, arrived with a solemn expression and an air of reluctant respect. "Lord Peter, I have some news that may be of interest," he announced. Wimsey gestured for him to continue. "Sir Ambrose's personal secretary, Mr. Penn, has come forward. He wishes to speak privately with you." Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Penn has been conspicuously absent from our inquiries until now." "Very well." The secretary was a nervous man, his hands trembling as he recounted a conversation overheard shortly before Sir Ambrose's death. "I heard raised voices in the library. Sir Ambrose was arguing with someone. Lady Fremantle, I believe. They spoke of trust and secrets, and then Sir Ambrose threatened to reveal everything." "And did you hear what everything entailed?" Wimsey pressed. "No, my lord. The voices were muffled, but there was a mention of the clock. Something about it striking without sound." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Bunter. The peculiar detail resurfaced, no longer a mere curiosity, but a vital clue. That phrase, "the clock striking without sound," echoes Miss Tilly's earlier statement and suggests a deliberate manipulation of time or perception. Wimsey mused. "We must examine the clockwork and its mechanisms with the utmost care." Later that afternoon, the horological room was once again the scene of intense scrutiny. Wimsey and Bunter dismantled the grandfather clock, exposing its intricate gears and delicate escapements. They discovered a subtle tampering. A small, nearly imperceptible device had been inserted to mute the striking mechanism. A muffler, Wimsey concluded. This was no accident. Whoever altered the clock intended to silence the hour's toll, to obscure the precise moment of the murder. The implication was profound. The killer sought not only to conceal their deed, but to distort the very fabric of time itself within the manor. The web of intrigue thickened, the shadows deepened. Somewhere, concealed behind the genteel exterior of Elmstead Manor, the truth awaited its unmasking. And Lord Peter Wimsey, ever the vigilant detective, was closing in with the quiet certainty of the inevitable. The day waned into a fog-laden afternoon, the sort that seemed to smother the landscape in a persistent grey, muting colours and softening edges into uncertain shapes. Elmstead Manor, with its looming chimneys and shuttered windows, resembled a stage set where every character waited breathlessly for the next act. Lord Peter Wimsey found himself pacing the gallery, the image of the silenced clock striking overlaid in his mind with the soft echo of Mr. Penn's whispered revelations. "Time, my dear Bunter," Wimsey said, turning from the window with a touch of his habitual irony, "is both our ally and adversary. The murderer endeavoured to rewrite the hours, to conceal the moment of crime beneath the cloak of silence. Yet the truth has a habit of demanding its own hour." Bunter, whose practical sensibilities kept him firmly grounded, was already gathering the day's notes. "So, my lord, the question is, who stood to benefit from this manipulation of time?" "Precisely. And to answer that, we must return to the library where Sir Ambrose met his fate. It is there, I suspect, that the clock's silence served a deadly purpose." They descended the grand staircase, the heavy footsteps absorbed by the thick carpet, a muted rhythm against the manor's oppressive stillness. The library's door creaked slightly as Wimsey pushed it open, revealing the dim interior where the late baronet's body had been discovered. The great clock, still inert and silent, seemed to mock the stillness with its frozen hands. Wimsey's gaze settled on the arrangement of the room. "Observe the position of the furniture," he said, gesturing to a heavy mahogany chair, slightly askew from its usual place beside the desk, and the faint impression of a footprint in the dust on the polished floorboards. "An intruder, perhaps," Bunter suggested. "Not quite. Notice how the footprint is delicate, almost hesitant, not a smear, but a crisp outline. It suggests a visitor familiar with the room, careful but unnerved." Whimsy moved to the desk and opened a drawer, revealing a scattered collection of papers, among which lay a small leather-bound notebook. The handwriting was neat, but the contents revealed a mounting agitation. Notes on conversations, cryptic references to the silent strike, and trust betrayed. As Whimsy read, a knock sounded at the door. It was Miss Tilly, the housekeeper, her face pale but resolute. "My lord, I'd almost forgotten. There was something odd about the salver used at the evening tea. It disappeared after the guests left." "A missing salver," Whimsy mused. "An excellent detail, Miss Tilly. Objects removed from a scene often bear significance beyond their apparent triviality. Do you recall who last handled it?" "I'm afraid not, sir. The table was cleared by the footman shortly after the meal, but the salver vanished between then and the discovery of the body." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "I believe we are beginning to see the outline of a carefully constructed stage, one where time, objects, and presence have been manipulated with deliberate precision." He returned his attention to the notebook, tracing the last entries. "Here, Bunter, the clock will strike, but none shall hear. Silence is the accomplice of deceit." A poetic phrase, but with an unmistakable edge of menace. "Who among the household is capable of such meticulous scheming?" Bunter asked, brow furrowed. "Ah, that is the question. Let us consider the personalities we have encountered. Lady Fremantle, with her polished composure and veiled anxieties. Evelyn Carstairs, whose arrival unsettled the fragile equilibrium. Mr. Penn, the ever-watchful secretary with secrets of his own, and, of course, the servants, whose loyalties and resentments are often underestimated." Whimsy stood abruptly. "We need to revisit the scene at the hour of the murder, step by step, confirming the timeline with the precision of a chronometer." The household staff were gathered in the sitting room, summoned by Bunter's gentle coaxing. One by one, Whimsy questioned them about their whereabouts and actions during the critical hour, probing for discrepancies and inconsistencies. The cook recalled preparing the evening meal and then retiring early due to a sudden illness. The footman described clearing the dining table, but with vague uncertainty about exact times. The gardener was said to have been out by the stables, confirmed by a stable hand's testimony. Yet one statement caught Whimsy's ear, a subtle contradiction from the maid who served tea, who insisted she heard the clock chime twice, a detail at odds with the clock's known silence. "2 chimes," Whimsy repeated, arching an eyebrow. "But the clock was muffled to silence, was it not?" The maid blushed, stammering. I might have imagined it, my lord. It was late and the house was so quiet. Perhaps it was a bird outside or the echo of a distant bell." Whimsy's smile was dry, almost imperceptible. "Perception is often the most treacherous witness. Thank you, Miss Aldridge." Later, when the others had departed, Whimsy lingered, musing aloud. A clock silenced, a salver vanished, and a maid uncertain of what she heard. These fragments, when pieced together, suggest a concerted effort to distort the temporal and material facts. The night brought no rest. Whimsy sat by the fire in the library, turning over the puzzle with the methodical patience of a chess master considering his next move. The fog pressed against the window panes, the manor exhaling its ancient secrets in whispered drafts. Suddenly, a thought struck him. "Bunter, we have relied on spoken testimony and physical evidence, but what of the voices overheard by Mr. Penn? If Lady Fremantle and Sir Ambrose quarrelled over trust and secrets, it must have involved knowledge too dangerous to reveal." He rose and retrieved the letters and notes once more, focusing on a particular phrase in Sir Ambrose's codicil that referenced an unspoken burden borne by Lady Fremantle. Could the key to the clock's silence be not only in its mechanism, but in the metaphor it represents? A silence imposed to guard a shame or guilt that no one dared voice. Bunter nodded. Perhaps it is Lady Fremantle who has most to hide. or someone seeking to protect her reputation or their own. Jealousy, fear, desperation. These are potent motivators, far more so than mere financial gain. The following morning, Whimsy requested an audience with Lady Fremantle. They met again in her sitting room, where the weight of the investigation seemed to press more heavily upon her. "Lady Fremantle," Whimsy began, "there is a matter that requires your candid attention. I understand that you and your late husband had differences, some of which were deeply personal and secretive. Would you care to elucidate?" She regarded him with a measured gaze. "Lord Peter, marriage is rarely without its shadows. Sir Ambrose was a man of great complexity, some might say contradictions, but I assure you, I am no murderer. I do not accuse, only seek understanding. Your reluctance to reveal the content of your correspondence with your solicitor and the manner in which you silenced the clock suggest a burden you carry." Her composure wavered briefly. It was not to conceal a crime, but a scandal, one that would have destroyed our family's honor. "Scandal is the mistress of murder investigations," Whimsy replied, his voice soft but unwavering. "Would you permit me to see the letter your solicitor sent you?" After a tense pause, she handed over a folded sheet sealed with the Fremantle family crest. Whimsy unfolded it with care, scanning the precise but damning content. A warning that Sir Ambrose's first marriage, previously concealed, produced a son, a half-brother to Evelyn and heir by bloodline. "Aha," Whimsy murmured. "The plot thickens indeed. A hidden heir, a silenced clock, and a vanished salver. The shadows lengthen." As Lady Fremantle's facade cracked, Whimsy sensed the story edging closer to revelation. The silent strike of the clock was no mere accident, but a symbol, an attempt to silence the past, to deny the presence of a bloodline that threatened the fragile balance of inheritance and reputation. Yet the question remained. Who, among these players cloaked in civility, wielded the clock's silence as a weapon to deliver death? And what was the final note of betrayal that had echoed through the halls of Elmstead Manor? The game was far from over, and Lord Peter Whimsy was preparing his next, and undoubtedly most subtle, move. The day wore on, heavy and unrelenting, as if the very atmosphere of Elmstead Manor conspired to weigh upon the spirits of all within. Lord Peter Whimsy sat quietly in the drawing-room, his fingers tapping an absent-minded rhythm on the arm of his chair, while Bunter busied himself making meticulous notes and cross-referencing the information gathered thus far. Outside, the wind swept the creeping fog into curling spirals, as though the weather itself sought to cloak the house's secrets in mystery. Yet, within these walls, logic must prevail. Whimsy's mind was occupied chiefly with the recent revelation, a hidden heir, a long-concealed son from Sir Ambrose's first marriage, whose existence shattered the neatly stacked veneer of the Fremantle family's respectable lineage. It was the kind of secret that gnawed away at the foundations of trust and respectability, the kind that bred silent resentments, whispering betrayals, and finally, perhaps, murder. "Bunter," Whimsy began, "we have here not merely a murder, but a conspiracy of silence and deception. The clock that struck without sound is a symbol, no less than a riddle. If the murderer sought to manipulate time, to mask the moment of death, then the true timeline is the key to unmasking their guilt." Bunter nodded, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Quite so, my lord, but the puzzle remains. How could the clock have been silenced, and by whom? Mr. Penn mentioned the clock's mechanism had recently been serviced, and the housekeeper spoke of a peculiar visit from a clockmaker." "Precisely. I intend to pay a call upon this Mr. Whitmore," Whimsy declared. "A clockmaker, often overlooked, can hold the secrets of a household in his grasp. For what is a clock but a servant to time, and what is time but the great master of alibis?" Arrangements were made, and soon after, a rather thin, spectacled gentleman arrived, carrying a leather case of tools that looked as if they had belonged to a watchmaker of the Queen's Guard. Mr. Whitmore, the clockmaker, was a man of quiet demeanour but possessed a keen eye, and he welcomed Wimsey's inquiries with a mixture of professional pride and reluctant suspicion. "Ah, yes, the great-grandfather clock in the library," he said, opening his case. "It was brought to me 2 weeks ago for a thorough cleaning and slight adjustment. The pendulum had been losing time, and the chime mechanism was slightly out of sync. I replaced the hammer and ensured the chime rods were correctly tuned. It's delicate work, mind you. The slightest misalignment and the sound may fail altogether." "Did you note any signs of tampering, Mr. Whitmore? Any unusual marks or interference beyond your own adjustments?" Wimsey asked, his gaze piercing. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. "The clock was in excellent condition when I left it. No marks of forced entry or damage to the mechanism. But it did strike me as odd that the owner wished for the chimes to be muffled, employing felt pads to silence the sound. A curious request, I must say." Wimsey's eyebrow arched. "Muffling the chimes? That strikes me as no mere eccentricity. Who requested such a measure?" "That would be Lady Fremantle herself, or so I was told," Whitmore replied. "She said the noise disturbed her late husband's concentration during his studies." A plausible explanation, but Wimsey knew better than to accept such surface-level justifications without scrutiny. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. Your candor is appreciated." As the clockmaker gathered his tools, Wimsey's mind was already spinning with possibilities. The muffled chime was a deliberate choice, designed to mask the sound at a critical moment. Yet who, other than Lady Fremantle, had access to authorize such modifications? And when precisely was the clock silenced in relation to the murder? That afternoon, Wimsey requested a reunion of the household's principals in the library, the very heart of the enigma. The group gathered somewhat warily, the atmosphere taut with the unspoken tension of secrets close to the surface. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wimsey began, "I propose a small exercise. Let us reconstruct the timeline of the evening with exacting precision. The clock, as we know, was silenced deliberately. Its absence has caused confusion. I ask each of you once more to recount your movements and actions between 7 and 9 o'clock. Lady Fremantle's lips pressed into a thin line. Evelyn Carstairs' eyes darted uneasily. Mr. Penn adjusted his cuffs, masking a subtle tremor. Wimsey's questioning was calm but relentless, drawing out details, pauses, contradictions. The cook swore she had retired by 7:30, but the footman was vague about when the tea service was cleared. The gardener's alibi remained solid, confirmed by the stable hand's watchful eye. Yet it was Evelyn Carstairs whose account presented the first tangible discrepancy. She insisted she had spent nearly an hour in the drawing-room, reading, yet no one recalled seeing her during that time. Her supposed conversation with Mr. Penn was reported only second-hand. "Miss Carstairs," Wimsey remarked smoothly, "you describe yourself as a woman of letters. Would you indulge me by recounting the titles you read this evening?" She hesitated, then named a novel by Wilkie Collins, though Wimsey was aware that the volume in the drawing-room was a collection of Shelley's poetry. An inconsequential detail, one might say. But for Wimsey, it was a thread. "Ah, Miss Carstairs, literature is a mirror, but sometimes also a mask." Turning to Mr. Penn, Wimsey pursued the secretary's timeline. Penn claimed he had spent the evening organizing papers in his study, but again, no one could corroborate his presence. "Mr. Penn, is it not true that your study lies beyond the library, separated by a soundproof door?" "Yes, my lord," Penn replied cautiously. "And might I ask if you heard the clock strike at any time?" "No, sir. The clock was silent throughout the evening." A crucial piece, considering the muffling. Wimsey's gaze swept the room. Soundproofing is a remarkable invention. It affords privacy, but also opportunity for secrets or for misdeeds. He allowed the statement to hang for a moment, then resumed. "Now, Lady Fremantle, you authorized the silencing of the clock, yes?" "I did. It was at Sir Ambrose's request." "Indeed. Yet Sir Ambrose was found dead in the very room the clock inhabits. A strange irony, is it not? Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Wimsey turned to the footman. You cleared the table and removed the tea salver. Whose idea was it to remove the salver, may I ask? The footman shifted uneasily. I was ordered to clear the table quickly. The salver was not accounted for afterward, my lord. Thank you. Wimsey's tone was faintly mocking. A missing object in a missing hour. Curious. His thoughts circled back to the strange notebook with its cryptic references to the silent strike. Could the salver be a signal or a tool? The subtle movements of objects often concealed deeper intentions. As the interview drew to a close, Wimsey's mind turned to the final puzzle piece, the hidden heir. The note from the solicitor made it plain that Evelyn Carstairs was not merely a visitor, but an intruder upon a fragile inheritance. Miss Carstairs, Wimsey said quietly, your presence here is more significant than you care to admit. She lifted her chin defiantly, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. In matters of family secrets, the past has a way of clawing back into the present. You represent the bloodline that Sir Ambrose sought to conceal. There was a pause as the room held its collective breath. Yet, Wimsey added, concealment can breed desperation, and desperation can lead to murder. The game was poised on the edge of revelation. The pieces were assembled, but the picture they formed was still incomplete, obscured by silence and shadows. Outside, the fog deepened, as if nature itself awaited the unraveling of Elmstead Manor's most closely guarded secret. And Lord Peter Wimsey, ever the patient strategist, was ready to strike at the heart of the mystery with the quiet precision of a clock's final chime. The drawing-room emptied slowly, the charged silence lingering long after the last footstep faded down the corridor. Wimsey remained seated, his fingers lightly drumming the armrest as he sifted through the gathered fragments of testimony, every detail weighted with newfound significance. Bunter approached quietly, a sheaf of notes in hand, his expression grave yet expectant. My lord, Bunter said softly, the contradictions you teased out tonight. Carstairs' reading, Penn's elusive whereabouts, the silenced clock. They form a lattice through which the truth struggles to emerge. Wimsey nodded. Indeed, Bunter, but lattices, like webs, can both trap and conceal. Our next step must be to follow these threads back to their source. He rose deliberately and walked to the window, gazing out into the thickening fog that cloaked Elmstead Manor like a shroud. The clock's silence was orchestrated. The question remains, for whose benefit? Their attention turned to the mysterious salver, an item absent since the evening's upheaval. A quick search of the servants' quarters yielded no trace. Someone took it deliberately, Wimsey mused. Either to hide it or use it as a signal. This is no ordinary household disturbance. It's a message, or a weapon disguised as a message. Bunter unfolded the solicitor's note once more, eyes narrowing. The note referring to the silent strike. Could that be a clue to the murderer's identity? Perhaps a code between conspirators? Possibly. Wimsey agreed, but if so, it is a code only intelligible to those within this tangled web of deceit. He paused, then said, We must consider the solicitor too. His sudden death by apparent heart attack was suspiciously timed. Was it natural, or has someone gone to extraordinary lengths to prevent the truth from surfacing? That very thought led Wimsey to request the medical examiner's report, and the results deepened the intrigue. The solicitor had shown no signs of chronic illness, yet toxicology revealed traces of a rare poison, one that induces cardiac arrest almost indistinguishably from natural causes. Someone has a taste for subtlety, Wimsey remarked dryly, eliminating obstacles with an invisible hand. With this fresh knowledge, Wimsey and Bunter sought to reconstruct the solicitor's final hours. A ledger from the solicitor's office revealed frequent, discreet correspondences with a mysterious correspondent signed only as M. One letter, marked urgent, mentioned a meeting at Elmstead Manor the night of the murder, an event previously unreported. This meeting must have been clandestine, Wimsey deduced, and its contents vital enough to warrant murder. He contemplated the suspects anew. Evelyn Carstairs' presence was no mere coincidence. Her identity as the hidden heir brought motive. Penn's evasions hinted at involvement beyond mere secretary duties. Lady Fremantle's insistence on the clock's silence suggested foreknowledge of the impending crime. Wimsey turned to Bunter. "Tonight we observe carefully. Each player has a part, and the stage is set for the final act. Let us prepare to draw out the murderer's mask before the dawn." As the household settled into uneasy rest, Wimsey and Bunter arranged discreet watches and renewed interrogations, probing for slips and hidden truth. When the hour came to confront the shadowed past with unrelenting logic, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. The investigation's next turn promised to illuminate the tangled threads, or to ensnare them forever in the silence of Elmstead Manor. The night deepened, and Elmstead Manor lay wrapped in a thick silence that seemed to throb with unspoken tensions. Lord Peter Wimsey reclined in his chair by the fire, the glow flickering across his sharply defined features, his eyes ever vigilant behind the faintly amused mask he wore so well. Bunter stood nearby, prepared and attentive, yet cognizant of the delicate balance in which they now found themselves. "It is curious, Bunter," Wimsey began, breaking the quiet, "how a clock that does not chime can still mark the passing of moments laden with dread." He drew a slow breath. "We have the missing salver, the silenced clock, the untimely death of the solicitor, and a house full of actors all playing their parts with admirable composure. The question, as always, is which of them plays the murderer." Bunter inclined his head. "The solicitor's poison, the coded letters, there must be a key, and Evelyn Carstairs, as the secret heir, stands to gain the most. Yet she denies all involvement with a convincing zeal." Wimsey's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Conviction, Bunter, is no sure measure of truth. Let us revisit the timeline and the peculiarities we have uncovered." He produced a neat diagram on a sheet of paper, plotting the movements and interactions of the principal players from the late afternoon through the evening's hour of the murder. "Observe, the clock ceased chiming precisely at 8:47 p.m., a full 13 minutes before the solicitor was found. Yet no one reported hearing the usual heralding of the hour. Miss Carstairs claimed to have been in the library. Miss Penn was ostensibly with Lady Fremantle, and the butler, though claiming to have been in the servants' hall, failed to notice the absence of the chimes. Curious. Bunter tapped his fingers thoughtfully. "The soundproofing in the new wing is reputedly excellent. Might the clock's silence have been intended to create confusion in that particular area?" "Exactly." Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "It was not merely the silencing of the clock, but the calculated obscuring of time itself, and the missing salver, which, as we learned, was used as a sort of signaling device in the household. Its absence suggests a planned disruption of the evening's order." He paused, recalling the servants' testimonies, their nervous glances, the hesitant corrections, the small discrepancies in their stories. The butler, Mr. Havisham, insists he was in the servants' hall at 8:47, yet the housekeeper claims to have seen him near the drawing-room shortly before. The simplest explanation is a deliberate misdirection. Wimsey rose, walking to the mantelpiece where the antique clock sat, silent and ominous. "Now, about the solicitor's final meeting. The letters signed M indicate a person of influence and secrecy. Who among us could fit such a profile? Lady Fremantle, seated stiffly in the adjoining room, had displayed a sharp intellect beneath her genteel exterior. Evelyn Carstairs' guarded responses hinted at concealed alliances. Even Miss Penn, seemingly a mere secretary, revealed a surprising knowledge of the manor's hidden passages and household secrets. "Bunter," Wimsey said, "we must confront them individually, testing their stories with subtlety and precision. Truth, like a clock mechanism, often hides in the interplay of small, well-crafted parts." The interrogation began with Evelyn Carstairs, her composure unwavering but eyes flickering with concealed emotion. Whimsy's tone was gentle but incisive, weaving questions around her movements, her knowledge of the solicitor's affairs, and her relationship with the other inhabitants. "You mentioned receiving letters from your solicitor," Whimsy observed, "some with urgent requests. Did any pertain to the inheritance or disputes within the Fremantle family?" Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Yes, there was tension, certainly, but I did not anticipate such violent resolutions." Next came Miss Penn, whose demure facade cracked when pressed on her knowledge of the manor's secrets. "I only knew what was necessary," she insisted. Yet Whimsy noted the way her fingers twitched as she denied any knowledge of the salver's disappearance. Finally, Lady Fremantle, regal and unyielding, offered little but carefully measured replies. Whimsy noted her quick, subtle glances toward the clock on the mantelpiece, the very clock that had refused to sound the fatal hour. The night deepened as the questioning proceeded, each revelation folding seamlessly into the next, tightening the noose around the truth. Yet Whimsy withheld his final judgments, his mind assembling the pieces in silent calculation. At last, he addressed the assembled group, his voice low and precise. The clock struck without sound, because it was silenced by design, a gambit to confuse and conceal. The missing salver, a small yet vital instrument of communication, was removed to disrupt the household signal system. The solicitor's death was hastened by a poison as subtle as the murderer's intent. He paused, eyes glinting with quiet triumph. The key to this puzzle lies in the interplay of time and deception, in the silent moments where truth hides beneath the surface. The room held its breath. Whimsy's enigmatic smile deepened. "It is time, dear friends, to illuminate the shadowed corners of Elmstead Manor and to reveal the hand that guided these silent strikes." The drawing room was heavy with expectation as the last embers of the fire flickered low. Lord Peter Whimsy stood near the hearth, his silhouette casting a long shadow over the assembled company, each face pale with apprehension, each pair of eyes flickering with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Bunter stood quietly behind him, ever the reliable sentinel. Whimsy's voice was calm, measured, and laced with that characteristic wryness which could disarm the most resolute denials. "Ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves at the terminus of a rather convoluted journey, yet one whose destination has been visible all along, to those willing to observe the quiet ticks beneath the clamor of suspicion." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "The mystery of the silent clock and the unfortunate demise of Mr. Harcourt, the solicitor, is not one of supernatural malice, but of human frailty and craft. The mechanism by which the clock was silenced was no mere accident. The removal of its chime at 8:47 was calculated to obscure the precise moment of death, thereby muddling alibis and muddling minds." His eyes swept the room, sharp and appraising. The missing silver salver, a seemingly insignificant object, was in fact an integral part of the household's secret communication, a signaling device known only to a few, among them the servants and, crucially, Miss Penn. A murmur rippled through the group. Miss Penn's face, previously composed, twitched imperceptibly. "It was Miss Penn who removed the salver," Whimsy continued gently but inexorably, not out of mere mischief, but to prevent a message from reaching the victim at a critical moment. Her motive, though tangled in personal desperation, was one of jealousy and fear. Fear of exposure, jealousy of her mistress's favored position, and the knowledge that the solicitor was privy to truths best left buried. Miss Penn's composure broke. I never meant for anyone to be harmed. I only wanted to protect Lady Fremantle." "Indeed," Whimsy said, "but the poison administered was not by your hand. That, dear Miss Penn, is the domain of Lady Fremantle herself." A gasp escaped from Evelyn Carstairs. her eyes wide. Lady Fremantle's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze unwavering. Lady Fremantle's reasons were rooted not in affection, but in calculation, Whimsy explained. Mr. Harcourt had discovered a will favoring Miss Carstairs, something that threatened Lady Fremantle's control over her family's estate. Faced with losing both money and influence, she resorted to poison, a slow and subtle method, carefully timed. He turned to the silent clock above the mantelpiece. The silent clock was her accomplice. Disabled to mask the exact time of death, it afforded her an alibi, or so she believed. Lady Fremantle's defiance faltered. "You cannot prove it." "On the contrary," Whimsy said, stepping forward with a small vial, "the remnants of the poison found in the solicitor's system, and on the accounts of travel times, overheard conversations, and the secretive movements of the servants, we have the incontrovertible timeline." Her shoulders sagged, the veneer of nobility cracking under the weight of exposure. The tension broke, the room exhaling collectively. The law would take its course, but for now, Whimsy allowed himself a small, dry smile. As Shakespeare put it, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Human weakness, cloaked in civility, wrought this tragedy, not phantoms or fate. He gathered his coat, tipping an imaginary hat to the bewildered onlookers. "And now, my friends, I shall take my leave, leaving Elmstead Manor to find peace and time to chime once more." With that, Lord Peter, Whimsy, and Bunter departed into the cool night, their footsteps fading beneath the solemn ticking of the restored clock, justice quietly restored in the wake of silence.